Good morning, everybody. What I'll be doing is allowing you to benchmark. Benchmark is the technical word for stealing, if you do it well, one great idea, just one idea, but it's very powerful to help you rethink your organization, become more agile, whatever the aim that you have. This is something that I've used in organizations as different as pharmaceuticals, engineering, high tech, public sector, and it works. So this will give you a chance to see what to do about it. All of that, slightly more than subliminal plug for one of my last books, okay? Not me in the bathtub, very young, handsome, muscular, tanned guy, obviously my Hollywood body double. He's there because he's having a eureka experience, and I hope you have a eureka this morning, okay? The idea will be not too bad in English. That means awesome in American, okay? Now, it's not easy to think about the future. There are two main ways of doing it. First is to predict the future. Second, to talk about what we're going to talk about, inventing the future. Predicting the future is so hard. Let's see if we can even predict the past. I have a simple question for you. All right? 3 options. In the last 20 years, the percentage of the world's population living in extreme poverty has A, almost halved, B, stayed about the same, C, almost doubled. A, almost halved, B, remained about the same, C, almost doubled. Who thinks it's A, almost halved? Who thinks it's B, stayed about the same? Who thinks it's C, almost doubled? Okay, A is the correct answer. Congratulations as a group. You did much better than the chimpanzees. Read Hans Rosling's fantastic book about it. But why don't we feel it? Perhaps because we're not a part of inventing it. This is a great book by a Canadian. I'm a part-time Canadian, full-time Englishman. Really about, it shows how the experts in any field predict the future worse than chimpanzees, okay? And it's actual research. Fantastic book. But what we're here today to talk about is inventing the future. And you'll understand this phrase, won't you? It was Alan Kay, a mentor to Apple Computers, said, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. It was a big management slogan 20 years ago. My great skill in selling, I managed to actually sell the idea back to Apple and say, okay, yeah, but how do you do it? Now, Apple certainly did that with what Jobs called insanely great products. One small story about how reinventing sometimes doesn't just take analytics, it can take aesthetics as well. Jobs was briefing his design engineers how to actually design the first icons on the iMac screen. He said, I want you to make those icons so beautiful that the customers will want to lick them off the screen. So for me, when I'm designing a process with an organization on innovation, on HR, whatever it is, I talk about lickability as one of the characteristics. Okay, let's talk about how we can make inventing organizations more lickable. First thing to say is stories beat vision statements. My brain goes fuzzy when I hear abstractions like alignment, agility, empowerment. You know, I just think I should write a management book based on an English writer who wrote a great book called Golfing for Cats. It's a collection of short stories, funny anecdotes. Why golfing for cats? Because it has on the cover a golf club wielded by a cat with German flags in on the golf course. Why? Because the English only bought books, he said, about golf cats and the Second World War. Now, I'd like to write a management equivalent, you know, aligning strategic empowerment to... Okay, right, there we go. But stories are powerful. I'm ashamed to say I don't know the Bible better. But think of the story of the Good Samaritan. The person who sees someone in trouble and actually crosses the road to help that person. How could you articulate that as a future behavior? You could have it as a corporate value statement, bullet point. Be kind to strangers. Or you could tell the story. Which one wins out? The story every single time. So typically, what I do in organizations when we identify the sort of changes in attitude, behavior, commercial operations that we want, we get teams to write their story of the near future. Anita Roddick did this. She said, we can't be bothered with strategy, we just tell stories. A brand is a story, and that's another story. This is the basic instructions for what you can ask teams to do. Identify the changes. You want to become more agile, you want to become more innovative, whatever, and they write this as a day in the life set 1 year, maybe 2 years in the future. 5-year plans never work for Stalin. They're not going to work for HR either, okay? So you write a short story. Now, what's powerful about this is that you don't tell people to write a positive story. But in my experience, 90% of the time, they do, okay? The critical thing as well is what perspective they take for the story. It could be from a customer, supplier, a management. And I'm going to read you an example in a minute. People are very creative with this. I was working with Diageo, who make Guinness, and one team wrote a day in the life of a Guinness can going through the supply chain. It quite revolutionized the way they thought about the stages of that process. But let me just read you a brief story and tell you how this works, okay? I'm going to read you 2 paragraphs of an actual story. And I'm going to take this from a really successful industry, British Railways. Has anybody actually been on trains in England? You think it's amazing that we invented the damn things, but we can't seem to run them very well. Okay, we feel the same thing about football. Now, this is January 2001. I'm sitting with the board of a railway company. We are trying to write a mission and vision statement. Think how many neurons pop out of your brain when you're trying to do that. And after being we'd lost the will to live, and finally the marketing director said, why don't we write the future as a series of stories? Okay, so this is one written from the perception of a first-class rail traveller, a customer, 1 year in the future. It's 6:30 on a cold, wet morning. I'm joining the train from Sheffield to St Pancras, Sheffield in the north of England, for that important meeting first thing. As I approach the train, I notice people from the railway company on the platform, not standing next to doors, but moving up and down the platform, trying to identify customers who need help. They all carry umbrellas, brollies, as it's raining heavily. I'm caught without mine. A young lady approaches me and asks me if I'm travelling first class. I say, yes, I am. She walks me to the actual carriage door and puts the brolly over my head. First time we wrote this, we had a Freudian typo, which read, puts the trolley over my head. Okay, but we should be. As I enter the high-speed train, the smell of fresh brewing coffee hits me. It's the same aroma as I experienced in the station. Not Nescafe, but proper coffee. I look around and notice how clean it is, warm. In the carriage, there's a member of the railway company making last-minute preparations for service of tea and coffee. He's dressed in their new rail uniform, not like a military uniform, relaxed and stylish. He immediately looks up, makes eye contact with me. Visitors to England for the first time. If someone on the street, a stranger, makes eye contact with you, run. Okay, I mean, but this is... All right, he's dressed. And he says, hello, Brian, how are you? By the way, Brian was the CEO of the company. We had a long discussion about whether this was a Brian or a Mr. Birdsall company, okay? I'm surprised he's recognized me. I acknowledge him and take my seat. And then it goes on, healthy foods, standard English high cholesterol breakfast, or the range of magazines from Vanity Fair to New York Times and so on. So what? So what? We wrote 6 stories like this. We used them to reinvent the customer experience. 9 months later, this company, it was about a £200 million company, not huge, but big enough, experienced 86% customer happiness on all of their surveys. We changed the platform layout as a result of the stories. We changed the food and the uniforms. I had to compare a fashion show. Can you imagine? Anyway, we changed the signage. Most people ask 4 times, am I on the right train? We didn't change all the staff attitudes. Let's be realistic. But just think of the difference between the abstraction, customer centricity, be kind to... Yeah, it's just an abstraction. It bounces off my brain. Whereas the story that people had created for themselves, does that make sense? Was extremely powerful. And you'd be amazed how creative. And then they work backwards. Okay? What do we need to do practically, attitudinally, behaviorally, operationally to make that story come true? You can use stories in many different ways that you create in this process, bringing a vision to life, I've just talked about, inventing your personal future. A personal story is incredibly powerful. If we had more time, I'd get you to start it now. I'd like you to start it today. Write the first paragraph of your own story of how you want a day in the life to be a year's time from now. Something magical happens when you do that. It's the positive aspect of mindset. Has anybody here bought a new car recently? Or got a new car? It doesn't need to be the latest model. What do you mind? What is it? Great. What colour? White. Anybody else? Come on, a new car? Okay, you're not that poor in HR. Come on. Marcus. Yeah, colour? What kind? Renault. Okay. In the first few days or weeks of buying that car, you look around the road. What do you notice? You notice the same vehicle, usually cleaner, or the better model, or whatever. You come across a new word in the newspapers, factotum. It's not rude. Immediately what happens is you switch on television, someone uses the word. You open a newspaper, there is that word. This is called excited mindset. Once you have a story, rather than, do you do those self-help books? And you look at the list of goals. Where do you want to be in 5 years' time? Why, there he has any imagination. Write a story, and it kind of lives within you, and you start noticing. Example, I had a guy who wrote a story about rediscovering his piano skills. He was a senior manager of an insurance company. It meant that the next day he noticed an advertisement in the local paper and went and bought a second-hand piano. It's all about attention. Yeah? We talk about being in the distraction economy. Stories help you root yourself into the attention economy because what you put your attention on grows. You can use it for, of course, presentations. I've coached a lot of people, even very frontline supervisors, to describe the future they want for their department as a story. They were brilliant at it. And everybody remembered that story. They did not remember the bullet points. Coaching, training, culture building. Okay? Living the story. It's one thing to have a story. What does it mean in a business to actually live it? Now, this is my simple version of Joseph Campbell's description. You know, Joseph Campbell really assembled the world's great myths, didn't he, about, 50 years ago, and really said there's a monomyth. There's one story, essentially. And Hollywood uses this. You take Star Wars or anything. This basic structure seems to be rooted or hardwired into us. This is my simpler version. Any story, and this is your life, your organization, needs a hero or a heroine. Okay? And, it's you. In other words, someone who you may be a reluctant, but if nobody else is, you're fed up with telling other people, you've got to change, you've got to embrace change. Oh, God. But if you're not practicing it yourself, not living it, it's not real. You're the heroes or heroines. You need a quest or purpose, okay? Is your quest or purpose muddy or clear? The stories bring that purpose to life, okay? I love that. Has anybody seen that film? This is very English, I know. Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where they're looking for the Holy Grail, and they shout up to the Frenchman at the top of the castle, he says, we've come for the Holy Grail. And John Cleese shouts down, ha, we've already got one, go away. Your quest is like the Holy Grail. There needs to be a clear purpose. Of course, in any fairy tale or any legend, there are obstacles, there are enemies. There is Darth Vader. You might already be thinking, who is Darth Vader in your organization? And of course, in the ancient myths, like Beowulf is something that all English undergraduates at Oxford University have to study for about a year, for God's sake. In that story, the demon is Grendel. Grendel comes out from the swamp and kills people at night. The hero slays the enemy, okay? And then they're all feasting and having a great time until, what's coming out of the swamp? Grendel's mother. So who is Grendel's mother in your business? Who are the real demons who are actually chasing you? Of course, it's a bit corny to say, but I'll say it. The real demon, it tends to be, or obstacle, is yourself. I remember this lovely story, old story, of a farmer who wants to borrow another farmer's plow because his own plow is broken. So he walks across the field saying, he's never going to lend that to me. No. He won't. He's not going to say yes. Can I borrow your plow? No, thank you. See, I told you I was right. I was absolutely right. If we believe we can or believe we can't, we're probably right. It's actually Henry Ford who said that a long time ago. There are helpers and magic. There's the magic potion, the cloak of invisibility, the flying horse. Isn't that what HR provides people? No. But what is that magic? Two things, I think. Firstly, is having a great mentor. And secondly, being prepared to take risks. Now, a mentor, by the way, and of course you've set up many mentoring schemes, my experience is the best mentors are people who don't work for your organization. How many of you here are in between mentors at the moment? I am. Mine died a few years ago. Mentors open doors for you. They are like Yoda in the story. Okay? Who is Yoda in your business? Is HR like Yoda? You do have some wisdom. How do you really open psychological doors, career doors, talent doors for people? I see you all as Yodas in that way. And finally, celebration and fulfillment. Most organizations are such dull places these days, okay, that people don't feel they can enjoy anything. Oh, it's very difficult and the future is uncertain and there's all this VUCA stuff and, so. Actually, uncertainty, it's absolute rubbish. The world is more certain than it's ever been that you will not die in a car crash, in childbirth, in et cetera, et cetera. And yet we don't feel it. That's another subject for conversation. On any parameter you can measure, the world is getting better over the last 50 years, but it just doesn't feel like it. I'd love you to come back with your ideas. I've been trying to write and grapple with this. The best questions are the ones you don't know an answer to, aren't you? I don't know why people don't feel it, but they don't. This is not the same thing as saying everything is fine in the world. We have a Syrian friend staying with us at the moment as a rebel. She can tell you things are not all right, but they're better. So how do you celebrate successes? Enjoy. And certainly in England, you can't be seen to be having a good time and celebrating. Certainly not spending money on anything. This doesn't need money. It's just a sense, as Max was talking about, of appreciation, of appreciating your team. Okay? This is Daniel Kahneman. You've probably all read Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. The Dan Gardner book earlier on, by the way, has a clearer summary of his thinking than he writes, but he's brilliant. He won the Nobel Prize for Economics despite never having taken an economics class in his life. Okay? A wonderful example of what we were talking about in the masterclass yesterday, beginner's mind. He said, no one ever made a decision because of facts. Okay? They need a story. All right? They need a story. And the story of the world seems to be the world's getting worse. It's not the right story. How do we replace that story with more positive stories that people create for themselves? This is Brené Brown, great TED Talk speaker. You've probably seen her. She said, stories are just data with soul. I always show that if I'm working with technical groups, okay, because then they feel a little bit happy. Oh, there is data involved then, isn't it? It's not just fairy tales. It's not just myths and legends and no, it's actually a way of bringing the data to life.